Imagine waking up in the middle of the night with a feeling your brain doesn't know how to process. It isn't pain, it isn't fear, at least not yet. It's silence. A silence so dense, so heavy, it feels as if it's pressing your eardrums inwards. You're in your bed, in the absolute darkness of rural Africa. You try to orient yourself and realize that the soundtrack of your life is missing. No crickets, no village dogs barking at the moon, no wind moving through the leaves. The world has gone mute. You try to stand up to see what's happening, but your legs don't respond. They feel as heavy as lead. You try to call your brother, who's sleeping on the mat beside you, but nothing comes out of your throat, only a dry, metallic gurgle. The air in your room has changed. It no longer smells of rain or earth. It smells like rotten eggs, like gunpowder, like something ancient and toxic. Imagine that this is your last conscious memory. And the next morning, when the sun rises over the valley, it reveals a scene that defies all logic. Cows collapsed where they stood, with grass still in their mouths, birds that fell dead in mid-flight, and 1,746 people who simply went out. No blood, no gunshots, no fire. On August 21st, 1986, in Cameroon, nature carried out the perfect crime. This is the story of the night when the air itself became a killer. To understand the scale of this tragedy, we have to set the scene. If you had visited Lake Nyos the day before the disaster, you would have thought you were in paradise. It is a volcanic crater lake in northwest Cameroon. Its waters were a deep hypnotic blue, surrounded by green, fertile hills. It was a prosperous area. Villagers grew maize and bananas and raised excellent cattle thanks to pastures rich in volcanic minerals. But the elders of the region had always looked at the water with a certain fear and respect. There were oral legends that said an evil spirit lived at the bottom of the lake, a deity that could become angry if it wasn't respected. Curiously, as so often happens in our case files, the folklore was not just fantasy, it was a geological warning encoded as myth, and the most terrible part is that nature had already warned us. But the world chose to look the other way. Just 2 years earlier, in August 1984, another nearby lake called Monoun did something very strange. It silently exploded and killed 37 people who happened to be passing by. The bodies appeared with unusual skin lesions. Confused authorities floated theories of chemical attack, terrorism, or local political sabotage. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody looked at the water as the real suspect. If science had paid attention to those 37 deaths at Lake Monoun, maybe the 1,700 people of Nyos would still be alive today. But the warning was ignored. That Thursday, August 21st, 1986, had been a happy market day in Nyos. People from all the surrounding valleys had come down to sell their crops. The villages were fuller than usual. People cooked late, laughed, drank palm wine. And around 9 at night, under a clear sky, families went to sleep. There was no war, no epidemic. Nothing suggested that hell was about to open beneath their feet. At about 9:30 that night, the peace broke. The few survivors who were on the higher hills, above the level of the lake, remember a sound that froze their blood. It wasn't a sharp explosion like a bomb. It was a deep, low rumble, a cavernous roar that made the ground vibrate for about 20 seconds. And then, absolute silence. What happened in the lake in that instant was extremely violent. Even though it was night, the gas release was so brutal that it generated an internal wave inside the crater. A wave more than 20 meters high rose within the lake, slammed into the rock walls and ripped centuries-old trees out by the roots, dragging them down into the water. The lake didn't just sigh, it roared with the force of a dam bursting. Out of that violence, a cloud was born. A dense, white mass rose from the water. But the physics of this cloud is what sentenced the valley to death. Because it was heavier than air, it didn't rise up into the sky. It behaved like a river of mercury. It spilled over the rim of the crater and flowed down the slope at speed, seeking the lowest ground. In disasters of this kind, like the one at Lake Monoun 2 years earlier, some witnesses reported that vehicle engines suddenly stalled when the gas displaced the oxygen in the air. At Nyos, the cloud did something similar to everything in its path. It slipped through door cracks, snuffed out kerosene lamps, and in a matter of seconds, turned the valley villages into silent traps. It hit the village of Nyos first. No one had a chance. Houses filled with this invisible air that no longer fed the lungs. In the total darkness, there were no long screams, just a few attempts to sit up, a reflex movement here or there, and then nothing. Joseph Nquine, one of the few witnesses who lived to talk about it, woke up hours after he had collapsed. His account is chilling. He said he felt no pain, but he couldn't speak. He was confused, like a drunk man. He tried to shout for his daughter, but his voice simply didn't exist. When he finally managed to drag himself out of bed, he found his daughter dead, his neighbors dead. The most disturbing thing was that there was no panic on their faces. Many looked as if they were sleeping peacefully. Death had come so quickly that their brains didn't even have time to trigger the fear response. The investigation that followed revealed a kind of geometric cruelty in the way people died. Because the gas was heavy, it flooded the rooms from the floor upwards, like invisible water. That created a macabre lottery of height. In many families, children sleeping on mats on the floor suffocated in minutes. Adults sleeping in higher beds, or those who happened to be standing at that moment, kept their heads just above the critical level of gas, like shipwreck survivors keeping their noses above water. There were parents who survived only to see that their children, sleeping half a meter lower, would never wake up again. The difference between life and death was a matter of centimeters. At dawn, some survivors who lived in higher areas came down into the valley and saw the impossible, bodies everywhere. But there were details that made the scene almost surreal. There were no flies. In a tropical climate, insects arrive at bodies in minutes. Here, even the flies, wasps, and beetles had fallen dead onto the victim's skin. The biological wipeout was almost total in the lowest areas. In some places, up to 25 kilometers around the lake, anything that breathed oxygen had fallen to the ground. When the news reached the government and the wider world, panic gripped Cameroon. The first theories were conspiratorial. People talked about a chemical attack, about a secret neutron bomb tested by foreign powers. Doctors were confused. Many survivors had blisters and lesions on their skin, which seemed to point to chemical burns or radiation. But when international scientists reached the shore of the lake, they saw the signature of the real culprit. The crystal blue lake was gone. In its place was a mass of dark, blood-red, almost brown water. The water level had dropped by more than a meter in one sudden movement. Geological forensic science put the pieces together. The red color wasn't blood, it was oxidized iron from the lakebed that had been dragged up to the surface. Lake Nyos is what's known as a meromictic lake. Its water layers don't mix easily. It's like a gigantic bottle of champagne, sealed under pressure. At the bottom, a volcanic source constantly injects carbon dioxide. For centuries, that gas accumulated down there, trapped by the weight of the water above. That night, something pulled the cork. A landslide, a small earthquake, a sudden change in temperature. Something disturbed the balance. The lake erupted, releasing hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 in one burst. Some studies estimate that as many as 300,000 tons of gas were released in just a few minutes. The cloud simply pushed the oxygen out of the valley. Over time, doctors and geologists revisited the mystery of the skin lesions. At first, they thought of acids or corrosive gases. Later studies concluded that the vast majority of victims died from asphyxiation. The gas shut down brain and body within seconds. The blisters and strange marks corresponded, in many cases, to pressure sores on people who lay unconscious for hours, immobile, pressing on the same parts of their bodies. In others, they were ordinary burns from braziers or lamps that victims remained in contact with while they were already in a coma. Another unsettling detail was the smell. Several survivors spoke of rotten eggs or gunpowder. The disturbing truth is that carbon dioxide itself has no smell. At very high concentrations, it can cause dizziness, confusion, and what are called olfactory hallucinations. The brain invents a smell to try to make sense of an invisible gas that is quietly switching you off from the inside. Once again, the mystery became far more human and far colder. The Nyos disaster was a lesson in planetary anatomy written in blood. Today, the lake has special pipes installed, like artificial organs, that pump gas from the depths, creating a perpetual geyser to stop the pressure from ever becoming lethal again. We've put the volcano on a kind of artificial respirator. But the story doesn't end there. Because Nyos has a big brother. About 1,500 kilometers to the southeast, on the border between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, lies Lake Kivu. Kivu operates with the same deadly mechanics as Nyos, but it is much, much larger. And worse still, its shores are not home to a few thousand farmers. Around 2 million people live along the shores of Lake Kivu. Entire cities like Goma sit right inside the danger zone. Scientists monitor the lake day and night because they know that a limnic eruption at Kivu would not kill 1,700 people. It could kill hundreds of thousands, even millions, depending on how and when the gas is released. In a way, we are still living on top of the largest natural gas bomb on the planet, hoping the cork holds one more day. Nyos reminds us that sometimes the killer has no human face and no fingerprints. Sometimes the killer is a natural process we simply weren't paying attention to. We draw borders, install sensors, launch satellites into space, and write laws to keep everything under control. But the Nyos catastrophe confronts us with something far more primitive. The feeling that the ground beneath our feet is not as solid as we like to believe. We live on a rock floating in space, a rock that is alive on the inside, that breathes, that accumulates gases, pressures, and tensions that don't care about our wishes or our plans. We like to think we own the house, when in reality we're just noisy tenants who have no idea where the main pipes run. That night in Cameroon, the planet reminded us of its indifference. Nature never signed a peace treaty with us. We simply coexist in a fragile truce. We accept that vulnerability every time we close our eyes to sleep, trusting that the air will still be breathable when we wake up. If this story has made you question the solidity of the ground beneath your feet, wait until you see what we have prepared next. Subscribe and activate the notification bell, because this Tuesday, we're traveling to Japan to explore another kind of invisible terror. A criminal organization that didn't need bombs or guns to kidnap an entire country, but instead struck where it hurts most, by poisoning children's sweets. The case of the monster with 21 faces. We'll be waiting for you.